Isn't that interesting? So that Jen and I often have said, I've seen people who, perhaps they would benefit from, 2 years of psychotherapy, or you can feed them right. And at the end of a couple of months, they're laughing. So what shall we do? And what is core? So Jen and I have both been humbled over time. I believed doctors to be important and drugs to be very important. And sometimes, for instance, with a chest infection, they can be. And then marrying a psychologist, I felt psychology, the motivation, behavior change is absolutely key to all sorts of things in your life, behavior change. And then both of us were humbled with this, that diet can trump psychology and can trump medicine, which brings a good dose of humility to our positions.
Welcome to Healing with the Diamonds podcast. This show features Larry and Kay Lynne Diamond, along with guests who are passionate about helping families heal together. Through personal stories and powerful conversations, you'll hear real-life experiences and practical tools for reclaiming health. Please note, the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your health routine. If you're enjoying Healing with the Diamonds podcast, we'd love your help spreading the word. Leaving a quick review or rating on your favorite podcast platform helps others find us and helps more families start their own healing journey. Thanks so much for listening. Now, here's today's episode.
Hello, I am Larry Diamond.
And I'm Kay Lynne Diamond.
And together we are Healing with the Diamonds. And our mission is to bring ancestral wisdom in practical ways to families like ours all around the world. And we are delighted. This will be our first podcast release of 2026. And I cannot think of anyone better. David Unwin, the low-carb GP, and Jen Unwin. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your social media handle, but they have an amazing story, both personal and professional, and family as well. So there's so much for us to discuss, and this is going to be a very hopeful, practical podcast of how people heal one person, one couple, one family at a time by unlearning and relearning and spiraling upward, reinventing themselves, and sometimes reinventing their careers. So that creative process is really what's going to heal humanity. So I am super, super excited.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. We're just after the holidays. How are you guys doing after all the craziness?
In between the holidays.
Well, I
I'd
guess
say,
in between, yes.
Yeah, in between. Twixtmas, they call it, don't they? Yeah, we're great. We had an enormous family Christmas with from 6-month-old babies to 90-year-old great-grandmas. And we served them several real food, low-carbohydrate feasts, which they all enjoyed. And now we've come away to the Lake District in the north of the UK that you guys have visited all those years ago when we did Real Food Rocks. And we're just going to be doing walking and, relaxing for a few days. So it's a pleasure to talk to you again.
I love that you talked about the age span in your family. And I know later we'll get into more of how you took what you guys relearned and brought that to your family and what that process looked like. But I think we want to start, both of you are MDs, and we kind of want to start, where did you guys start? How did your journey begin on real food and discovering what real food can do?
Particularly the healing power of low-carb, healthy fat, and how that relates to insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, which, at least in America, 93% of our population has to some significant real degree.
Yeah, I'll go again, doing all the talking. So I'm a psychologist, actually. I'm not an MD, so I'm a clinical psychologist by trade. But we'll probably come on to how that works so well, really, as a partnership between a doctor and a psychologist when we were trying to help David's patients and also help David to help those those patients make the behavioral changes they needed to make in terms, so that they could get the benefits of this kind of lifestyle. So it all started. It's probably about 14 years ago now that it must have.
2012.
2012. I read a book by Dr. John Briffa, who's a British GP, called Escape the Diet Trap. And I'd had a lifelong history, really, with struggles with weight and overeating, a bit like Larry's own story. I'd really yo-yo dieted and, from extremes really of overeating to undereating to, I just couldn't get control of how I ate. And as a psychologist, that was kind of embarrassing. It was kind of shameful really for me. Anyway, I read this book one January. It was about this time of year, and I happened to be in the supermarket, and there was this book in the remainder bin. It was kind of a pound or something like $1. But the title really spoke to me, Escape the Diet Trap. I thought that's what I need. And I read this book, and anyway, it was basically about the science of low carbohydrate and how, again, as Larry talks about, refined grains and sugars and bread and those kinds of foods that we've all been eating a lot of. And then actually had been kind of recommended to eat these sort of grain heavy foods, low fat foods, how these actually sort of drive overeating, they drive fat storage, all the problems with that. And he sort of talks about how you would implement a low carbohydrate diet. And that wasn't something I'd tried before. And I was trying to do the traditional low fat, high grain plan. I would make myself a whole grain banana sandwich to eat on the way to work. Not surprisingly, by about 10:30, I'd be absolutely starving, and I'd have to eat my hummus whole grain pita bread. And I laugh about it now because there's just no protein in any of that, and it's so different from how I eat now. Anyway, so that sort of started like that, and then David was getting a bit fed up. He's going to tell you the story, obviously, about how then we had the idea of working with his patients, because I had such a lot of success then. And initially David was laughing about it and saying, that it's all ridiculous, and that, in the book, John Briffa says that there's more sugar in cornflakes than there is in sugar, this kind of thing. And David saying, well, that's ridiculous. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense scientifically. And then he saw how well I did, and it sort of went on from then. So do you want to?
I think my journey began well before 2012 with a mounting sense of failure, really. Particularly, I remember doing repeat prescriptions for patients, and you just sit there clicking a mouse, click, 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 and every click is repeat prescriptions for drugs. For patients, I was spending hours just clicking all these drugs away, and it felt depressing. I just thought, how can this be right? Because even though I was prescribing more and more drugs for things like high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, nobody looked any better. So I just never I didn't see healthy people. So the experience of being a doctor was becoming depressing because, you start off as a doctor hoping to make a difference. And there I was, aged about 55, spending large parts of my day just giving out drugs to people who didn't look particularly well, and it just disappointing. Against that, we knew that the health of our population, the population I cared for, so this is north of Liverpool in the UK, we've got about 10,000 patients, and we knew that the prevalence of every single chronic disease of modern life was getting worse and worse. So again, anything to do with insulin resistance, fatty liver, diabetes, high blood pressure was all getting worse despite all my efforts. And at the same time, my own health was deteriorating to a point where I couldn't get through the day without a half-hour sleep after lunch. So I would have lunch and then be so tired I'd have to lie on my own doctor's couch. And then I'd wake up with a bar of chocolate and some biscuits and strong coffee for the afternoon. So things were getting pretty bad, really, but I knew something was wrong with medicine, wrong with society, and if I was to be honest, wrong with myself. And that's the backdrop. Plus, I should add about Jen. that she was an inveterate trier of diets. Jen has been in her life on every diet. And I've had wives of every different size. So I've had little wives, I've had medium-sized wives, and quite big
Enormous wives.
Enormous wives. And she had wardrobes to match each wife. And she tried all these, and she was constantly searching. So Jen kind of seemed to know that something was wrong because she was always searching for the diet that would have her sorted. That's why I suppose when Jen first mentioned Dr. Briffa's book, I wasn't as receptive as I should have been, because previously she'd had many other eureka moments about the cabbage diet or the egg diet or Weight Watchers,
Slimming
whatever.
World,
You know,
everything.
this is the way, because when your wife goes on a diet, we always used to laugh, the rest of us all nearly starved to death, because suddenly you go from a fridge full of good things to a fridge full of nothing. So as a family, we weren't super keen on Jen's various diets. I was a bit tardy, really, with the John Briffa thing. But I do remember that Jen would start reading passages about the physiology. And it was the physiology describing insulin resistance and what it does in terms of hunger, in terms of liver function, in terms of fat storage. All of these things, Jen kept saying, you've got to read this. You have to, you will promise to read this. And it started to intrigue me. And when I read that book, she was right. This was different. This was based in physiology that I knew to be true, whereas Jen's other diets weren't really so properly grounded in physiology. And I would say for all of us, right to the present day, it's this understanding of our physiology helps us individualize the diet to suit each of us, because you have to individualize the diet to suit each one of us. And you can't do that if you don't understand the principles, the physiological principles that underlie insulin resistance and also its partner in crime, hyperinsulinemia. You have to understand both of those. And when you do, then all sorts of things become clearer. So that gets us to about 2013. I'd say, and it's time you said something.
Yeah, then another piece was for me then about 6 years ago. So it would be after about 5 or 6 years, I did realize that that wasn't the whole story for me, that I actually could overeat even when I'm eating real whole foods, low carbohydrate. You know, there's still problematic times in my relationship with food. And it was only when I then heard Bitten Jonsson on the Diet Doctor website, there was a video about sugar addiction, food addiction. Then it finally slotted into place. Yeah, that was definitely me. That was my story. That explained all my behavior right up until low carb. And then it's kind of still explained why, for example, people like me will try and recreate our favorite foods using sweeteners and kind of keto cakes and keto snacks. And I obviously, like many of us, kind of slowly fell into that trap and had to get out of that as well. So I had to understand that actually I had an addictive relationship with things that tasted sweet, with grains. Yeah, with any of those kind of entertaining foods, let's say. So that, now I understand that I need to focus very much on real foods. I don't have much. I have to be careful with dairy and nuts and that kind of thing, and sweeteners particularly. So low carb was a big chunk of the story, but then I'd had a little bit more learning to do, and that was then I left my job in the National Health Service in the UK and sort of since devoted myself to this topic of food. We're now calling it ultra-processed food addiction, and how to help people and how to get that recognized as a recognized diagnosis so that people can get the help and advice that they need. But I'm sure we'll talk more about that as well.
I think a bit more useful context for what Jen just said was, so we started off the low carb really as an answer to insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, because it's the logical thing to do. and then you become a fat burner and your appetite goes down and your fatty liver goes and your blood pressure improves, all of which we published papers on. Every time we found something new, we interrogated our data, because so many people disbelieve what we do, that data is power. And it's we kept careful data from the very first day because we had so many enemies who hated what we did. They absolutely hated it.
Which puzzled us enormously in the beginning. We were
Did.
like, what is it they
Yeah.
don't like about people getting better?
I used to think, do
Yeah.
they want me to
Well,
put
we
all my
had
data back
Dr.
in drugs?
we had Dr. Fecky, who apparently inappropriately
yes.
reversed somebody's type 2. So, you're not alone if that makes you
Yeah,
feel any
exactly.
better.
And it was a bit of a mystery, but we're used to that now.
But funnily enough, our enemies turned out to be our friends in a way, because I was so frightened as a clinician of either making an error or being criticized. The collecting of the data has now given us something very, very powerful, because we've got data going back to January 2013 of what happens to all these patients in terms of cardiovascular risk, in terms of liver function, in terms of blood pressure, in terms of diabetes control, and then renal function. And we've got papers published on every single one of these, where all of these things have improved significantly. But just going back to what Jen was saying, so we had these patients, large numbers of patients, with astonishing improvements in all of these various risk factors. But then you would discover that they'd go on an all-inclusive holiday, or it would be Christmas or somebody's birthday, and then you'd have this odd thing where intelligent people do stupid stuff. So intelligent people who know that bread is bad for them will start eating bread. And it wasn't just Jen's journey, it was the journey of all of us together, because you would find people who started gaining weight, and it wasn't that the diet had failed. They weren't on the diet. They'd got cravings, and initially I called it carb creep. But that was wrong, because I was later discovered that I was trivializing something far more significant. This was not carb creep. This was hard-nosed addiction in my own wife. I'd lived with it, and I'd seen all of the various signs, and Jen and I never really put it together. But then suddenly, after Bitten Johnson, Jen saw her own situation clearly. And we thought, well, if a consultant psychologist can miss food addiction, well, so is everybody else. And then we discovered that we run group consultations once a month with our patients. And when you once suggest to somebody that, you keep getting these cravings and you do something that you regret, something that you know is harming your health, isn't this a little bit like alcohol or nicotine? And they nearly always go, exactly, yes, I know, I'm an addict. So it's one of these weird things so first of all, I was criticized for what I did. And then Jen, when she started talking about what we now call as ultra-processed food addiction, faced criticism and was often told that this thing does not exist. And so that you don't need to have any clinical provision for all these people with food addiction, because they have a condition that actually does not exist. And now I think we should go back to Jen with a little bit more about what to do about this condition that does not exist.
Let them ask a question.
Or you can ask a question. We could just roll on,
We could.
Yeah, so many things. And of course, as a service to all the people listening, I definitely want to get into the ultra processed food addiction, ultra processed people, but also specifically what you and David and your collaborators are doing around that. But I do want to point out that, like us, and this is an ongoing process, our relationship with food is for life. So we're always, just like a relationship with our partner, it grows and spirals and eddies and streams effortlessly. And occasionally you have to, step back and put a little more work in. So I want to assure people that's common. But I also it was so nice to hear that you were experiencing what probably everyone currently not low carb, healthy fat, or who never heard of that, and adequate protein, the sleepiness in the afternoon, the not being able to go from breakfast to dinner. So there's more than this, but I always tell my clients that there is a large component of biology driving behavior. So there's a different biological response to steak and eggs or an omelet with veggies than there is with the cornflake breakfast. So people don't discount making the choice to not have refined carbs and sugar, and especially starting the day with a protein and healthy fat breakfast. Because without any additional willpower, and yes, we will have to work on our relationship with food and the deeper issues, but at least get biology on your side. And then the introspective work will be so much easier.
Yeah,
That's what I think. So
absolutely.
what do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree. So I work very closely with Heidi Yever, who's a nutritionist, and we've run a number of sort of retreats where we, see people in person, and we've done sort of online work as well. And we always say, that's the baseline, is that you have to get to a point where you're eating real whole foods as nature intended and adequate protein. You won't believe that, particularly the number of women that really struggle with what is the right amount of protein. And when you tell them, they're like, my God, if I eat all that, I won't be hungry. And we're like, yes, exactly. Exactly. They're having I was having, banana sandwich, like hummus pita bread, and then I'd probably go home and have pasta bake or something like that. Well,
Yes.
there's, I was probably having 30 grams of protein in the entire day. So yeah, so we have those essential amino acids that we need and the essential fatty acids. And I think, until you've got that baseline, you're craving food in general or nutrition in general. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. And because fatty foods and meat and eggs have been sort of wrongly demonized, we've all sort of drifted away from that ancestral, as you mentioned. We use that idea a lot, that we're eating in the way that we evolved. We love that idea of we evolved over millennia. What were we eating? Ruminant meat mostly. Yes. And some bits and bobs that we could find if we couldn't find enough of that. So yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think the brain just senses when there's enough nutrition on board, and then stops us sort of looking around for that. So that nutrient density is the kind of the byword, really.
I think another fundamental principle is noticing what works for you. And when you're on sugar and carbs, you don't hear the signals.
Yes.
When you've come off your cornflakes and the sugar, you can tell what's a good day and ask yourself, why is it so good? What am I like when I'm at my best? And that starts a refining process, which is ongoing, which is, I think I'm better when I do this, or I seem to be better if I don't eat as often.
When do I eat?
Yeah, I seem to
feel better.
I seem to sleep better if I don't eat in the evening. Well, you never notice any of these because in the beginning, there's such a lot of food noise from the junk. But when that's quietened and you at times feel so energetic and well, and you feel my brain just is working better and I want more of this. And that helped me refine. It was the mental functioning, being a bit less depressed, more optimistic, coping better. That's what I wanted.
A lot of the people that we've worked with have sort of said at the beginning, I think I'm depressed, I might need help, or I've got this sort of, this trauma that I haven't dealt with or whatever. We'd say, well, let's get the eating right, get the nutrient density, get all the nutrients you need. And it's amazing the number of times then that the psychological issues are then no longer so pertinent, because the brain's working as it should. It's got all the nutrient that it needs to make the neurotransmitters that you need, the happy serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine. You're making all the neurotransmitters that you need because you've got the nutrients to make them, and you feel more like exercising, and that all just sort of happens naturally. And then people say, "Oh, it's really funny. I don't think I do need to." I was asking for you to refer me to a therapist, but I don't think I need it now. I feel so much better. Yeah.
And on that point, I'd like to say that I've come to believe that both food, sleep, and exercise can change reality. Trust me when I say these things can change reality. And, if you're eating right, or if you go, a good example is you can be very unhappy or distressed, and you can go a walk, and 20 minutes later, it's as if you've taken diazepam or something, because reality has changed. Isn't that interesting? So that Jen and I often have said, I've seen people who, perhaps they would benefit from, 2 years of psychotherapy, or you can feed them right, and at the end of a couple of months, they're laughing. So what shall we do? And what is core? So Jen and I have both been humbled over time. I believed doctors to be important and drugs to be very important. And sometimes, for instance, with a chest infection, they can be. And then marrying a psychologist, I felt psychology, the motivation, behavior change is absolutely key to all sorts of things in your life, behavior change. And then both of us were humbled with this, that diet can trump psychology and can trump medicine, which brings a good dose of humility to our positions.
I love that you guys have seen this change. You saw it in yourself first, and you started believing it because you were both doctors. You were looking at the data. But our podcast looks at the family and how to heal the family. So we have our own story about how that healing began and then how it branched out into our family. And I know that you guys have a pretty strong story as well. So I want to hear, how did your family first react to these changes? Because obviously they were very big changes for you. And then past that, how did you give the information? How did you deliver the information so that they could actually hear it? And how did that go?
I think initially they all thought we were a bit nutty at the beginning, but I think they could see how much better I was over time. Give it time. And then David as well, as he was saying, looking back, he hadn't had the test, but he's almost certainly type 2 diabetic at the time. And his blood pressure was very high, and he was sort of, stressed really at work, and so like your average doctor. And over time, he became much better at himself. His blood pressure is now sort of low normal. Blood sugars are normal and everything. So there was all of that. Our oldest 2 children had kind of left home, so initially they didn't really take much notice. The youngest was still with us, and he'd had a bit of a weight problem. I think it's a family thing from my side that the teenagers all kind of go through an overweight phase. So initially what we did with him was we would cook our meals, and then if he wanted rice or something like that, he would microwave some rice. And
he'd have to cook it himself.
Make it fine. And he did that for a while. And then eventually, I think, teenage lethargy came in, and the dinner would be ready and he couldn't be bothered, and he just ate as we ate. And then he slimmed down a lot. So
he looked fabulous.
And he's now, in terms of noticing sort of what's right for him, he's gluten-free.
Sugar-free completely.
Completely sugar-free.
I love it.
Wow.
I mean, mostly low carb, although he'll eat potatoes and, some real foods.
Real carbs.
So that was his story. And then the middle one, I think you probably know, is he's a butcher, retrained to
We
be a
met.
butcher, and he started noticing as well, I think on the back of what we did, that he'd always had sort of stomach trouble. That had been his weak spot.
Acid reflux.
He'd had sort of acid reflux, and he had some sort of skin problems. And he'd noticed that was always worse when he'd eaten a lot of refined grain, like bread or pasta, that kind of thing. So he started cutting that out, didn't he? And then he felt so much better. And now he's he's more or less carnivore, obviously, because he's a butcher and he just eats the meat that's there. He just cooks it there and eats it.
Right.
And he says that if he ever strays from that, even with a lot of dairy, or if he has any gluten, he just doesn't feel as well and energetic. And he's a guy he's up at 4:30 every morning, and he works till 8 o'clock at night. He works incredibly hard. So he just says that he notices that he's got the strength to do that if he eats that way. And then our eldest daughter, she just believes in it, really. She believes in giving kids real whole foods as nature intended.
It was when she became a mother.
Yeah.
You suddenly love these little things more than yourself. And the idea of nutrition of babies, or even antenatally. So her first pregnancy, I would say she was eating ordinary food, but then she had 3 keto pregnancies. So she went keto and saw the advantages in birth, and then the
And
children.
breastfeeding.
Oh my, they've developed wonderful dental arches, of course, because they're getting so much protein.
That's
So
awesome.
gradually you can see that this has leaked out into the family, but also the broader family. So there's
and
my
David's mum-
sister.
David's mom.
Oh, my mother was diabetic.
She was type 2, and
I
she
love this. I mean, not the type 2, but where you're going, yeah.
she
But we got-
understood. She still likes a bit of cake. She
doesn't need
was a war
metformin.
baby, so she still likes a little bit of cake. But she's completely off all her she's 90 now. She's not on any medication. She's doing really, really well. And your sister?
And then my
She's
sister
a dietitian, actually.
is a dietitian, and then she used to laugh. I remember she'd come on holiday with us and was really cross at the fact that she felt we were frowning at her cornflakes and the breakfast cereals. She's got 3 children, one of whom's in the final year of medicine, and they're all low carb or more or less keto,
Yeah.
and her husband. So it's spread. I won't bore you with any more, but it's spread throughout all our friends. That's true, really. And the broader family, and our decorator, and the plumber, and the electrician.
No, I love this.
Right.
And the farmer up the road suddenly lost weight, and the
People
guy
ask us,
Yeah.
and
the guy who cleans the carpets came back a year later, 3 stone down, and he said, "And you should see my daughter; she's lost 2.5 stone." And thus,
This is
because
amazing.
what works causes people to be curious, and they can see your skin's better or whatever, and they ask, "What have you done?"
And
Of course,
you
everybody
know,
thinks we're way giving now, don't they? But anyway, that's the story. It has spread and spread throughout the practice into the broader
the
community,
nurses and
then we've got mainstream TV now. So there's a documentary.
On the 8th of January.
The 8th of January, there's a TV documentary coming out. We've done mainstream news. We've done probably
Newspapers.
60 articles, at least 60 for mainstream papers, because these stories are very interesting, and it's something you can all try at home.
that's, so much, and we'll get this out before the 8th. Thank you for mentioning that.
Great. It's on Channel 4 at 8 p.m. UK time on the 8th of January.
And Dr.
Dr.
Chatterjee
Chatterjee.
is the host.
Oh, yeah, we'll have to ask Rangan. Maybe he'll come on in the future. We're huge fans. And this illustrates, and, I tell my clients, and actually, opinions don't matter. Opinions truly don't matter. Paulo Coelho, I might have gotten that wrong, the author of The Alchemist, one of my favorite quotes of his is, "Your opinion doesn't change the world, but your example does." And you guys illustrated that wonderfully. And there could be 50 million doctors, 500 million doctors. If something's working for me, it's working for me, or working for David or Jen. And yes, also knowing the science behind it is very cool. And I also, this is what it is, and I'm not going to get into why this happens. But before the discovery of insulin, William Osler in Canada, and we still have physical copies. Before we even knew the molecule insulin, doctors could observe that low-carb, healthy fat, and intermittent fasting reversed obesity and type 2. Before they had all the science of hyperinsulinemia, before that, they could see that it worked in practice. So it's a big, and of course I worked 6 years for the fasting method, and Dr. Jason Fung and Megan Ramos, who you're big fans of and
We are.
popularized hyperinsulinism. And the bottom line for anyone on planet Earth, and you've mentioned it as well, is quality of life, being a great mom or dad, and, giving our children the best opportunity to be who they can be and live up to their potential. And it's so wonderful. This is really what is changing Gaia. What is changing around the world, and what we need is coherent humans. And I call coherency heart-mind coherence, but actually each of our mitochondria and cell walls can be operating coherently or not. And then our tissues and organs, like a non-fatty, happy liver, operates coherently. If we don't eat too late in the evening, our pancreas is happy, and we have lovely, happy pancreas. And then we have lovely, happy us and lovely, happy marriages. So
Yeah.
this
Happy children. Yeah.
and children and all that. So, wow, I want the Unwins. Dr. Chatterjee can be the doctor in the house, and he can go over at it maybe New Year's and have the 6-month-old to 90-year-old. But that is so wonderful. So let's focus for a bit on the ultra process addiction and your work with Heidi and Britton. And if you want to bring in a book that I have all my clients read if they want to, or listen to, ultra processed people. And I tell them, this is one of my sayings to kind of crystallize it. I say it's expected and normal to have a distorted, I forget the word I use, the distorted relationship with food in a distorted food environment. That's expected. There's nothing wrong with you. You're no longer in a real food environment. If you were living in 18 of 2026, it would be much easier. But you're not, but we can overcome that. So yeah, let's get more into the addiction and destigmatizing it.
Yeah. I think that's
You, Jen.
how you've put that is really correct. Once you've seen it and the scales have fallen from your eyes, you kind of look around and you think you can't believe what people are eating and thinking is food. And when you go to the supermarket, you walk around and probably 90% of it is nothing that I would buy now or kind of touch, because you've kind of understood, that the harms that it's not just the processing per se, but the sort of ingredients that have become normalized, like these emulsifiers and thickeners and all this kind of weird stuff that we don't even really know how the body, is going to respond to, and that have only been there for this tiny amount of time in terms of our evolution. So I think there's a whole revolution needed about, sourcing our food locally, supporting farmers, remembering how to eat seasonally and how to cook, that, really is going to make a massive difference, not only to our own health, but to the communities that we live in. And we happen to live in a farming area. And of course, we've got this son now that's a butcher. So we sort of understanding that at a much deeper level than we did initially when we started on this journey. It's that, on the addiction side, you're completely right. I mean, there's just so much evidence now that those foods are literally designed to be addictive. And if you read the book Hooked by Michael Moss, he's an investigative journalist. I don't know if you guys have read that one. That the people in the industry actually know that that's what they're doing, and they will do they'll formulate a food. They'll put somebody in a brain scanner to feed them the food to see which formulations sort of light up the reward centers more than others. So they're sort of, literally designing these foods to be lighting up your reward centers. And then those primitive parts of the brain that are to do with survival, you're then driven to eat those foods and to find those foods. And they're not difficult to find because all you have to do is ring up Just Eat or something and they come straight to your door. So when we evolved, there was no mechanism of restraint. The whole mechanism was about survival, and it was about a drive to eat and a drive to hunt and to find things to eat at whatever time of year it was. We didn't need there were no breaks on that because there wasn't an overabundance of food. And of course, if a kill was made or whatever, you'd eat as much meat and fat as you could at one sitting. And that's a sort of limited thing. And then you'd try and preserve it. So it's a completely different setup to now. What amazes me really is that, so when you look at the studies of food addiction symptoms, about 14% of the general population will have those symptoms, if you like, which is about the same. It's a little bit higher than alcohol, but, it's more or less equivalent. So what surprises me is that it isn't even higher. What amazes me is that anybody lives in the world that we're living and can moderate their consumption of the kind of things that are around now. We just went for coffee before, didn't we, this morning? Went for a walk, went for coffee, ended up at a bakery, and there were all these huge cakes. I mean, they were enormous, and I had to queue, sort of looking at all these cakes until I got to the end to sort of have my coffee. And everybody else was having an enormous cake. And they were ludicrous. Nobody needs that much sugar. They were like this with frosting on top. And well, you guys know, you live in America. It amazes me that anybody's normal weight or non-diabetic, really, the world that we live in. And of course, that is just getting worse and worse all the time. So I think people need to understand that sugars and refined grains do act on the brain exactly the same way as alcohol and other drugs of addiction. And that if you feel you're out of control of your relationship with sugar and flour, you probably are. And because it's an addiction, what's the treatment? Exactly like any other addiction, the treatment is abstinence. And once you abstain, those cravings, I mean, you still get them from time to time, but they're much easier to resist. Whereas when you're in it, you feel you can't live without those things. And in fact, the things that you feel you can't live without are the things you need to give up, as David's always telling his patients. So bread, people say, I couldn't live without bread. You'd be so, you just need to try it for a little time. And then I think what those people don't realize is that if you can get past that wall and you can get 2 or 3 weeks in, which is what happened to me the first time I did it after John Briffa's book, about 8 days in, I just felt like the lights had been switched on. I felt amazed, so energetic, so everything was in multicolor. Yeah, it was. I think if people can get to that point and they can feel that wellness, then that's the thing that can keep them going in the future. Even if they, obviously I've had slip ups, but I feel worse again, and I know that I need to get back. I need to get back to that abstinent place, and then it's finding the support and the groups and the community. As we've said, it's grown now for us locally, but also, in terms of all the contacts we have, like with you guys around the world, there is that community of people living this way that you don't feel like a weirdo anymore. Now we feel like we've made the right choices.
I just wanted to say, I think it's interesting to explore the concept of hunger. Sure. And, I used to see hunger as a very simple thing, and that my model was that if I didn't eat, I would just become exponentially more hungry. I thought you kind of die of hunger in the end because you just get more and more hungry. And when you go low carb, start realizing there are different types of hunger. And I think there's a very different type of hunger for a delicious steak with broccoli and perhaps butter that you eat and then you're full. And there's a very different type of hunger that for me is to do with trifle or Christmas cake, which is I eat and I'm never, ever, ever full. I could always manage another slice. And I think it's quite helpful to be able to be honest with ourselves about what is, as it were, hunger as in I need nutrients, and hunger that is a more hedonic or greed-based thing. And that for me was a really useful thing to start thinking about. I think Am I properly hungry? And if my hunger is specific, it's probably a craving. So that if I'm hungry, then really whether it's a chicken leg or a steak or a boiled egg or whatever, then I'm grateful for that and I'll scoff it down. But then you get that sort of specific hunger in the evening when only a piece of cake will do or a sweet something. Now that is a altogether different beast from true hunger. And it's really helpful to be able to differentiate the two. And then you start coming into cravings. And what does that mean? And just as Jen said, the number of people who said, I can't live without bread. Wonderful Wolfgang Lutz book, Life Without Bread, is so interesting. And of course, I have patients who can't live with bread. And I say to people, is bread really more important to you than your kidneys or your retina? Because that's what we're fighting for. And then they laugh because they realize they just said something ridiculous. But this addiction thing is very powerful. Very powerful, where intelligent people like Jen are occasionally driven to do something that their intelligence says is a bad idea. And because it's so complex and so difficult, it needs support. It needs all sorts of things that Jen's trying to bring into the world: clinical services, help groups, books,
Diagnosis.
the acceptance of it as a problem, because it's a tiger that's got hold of you, or a dragon, I call it. It's got you in its teeth. And it's very difficult to shake off. And you live with in remission rather than... Sorry, Jen, you...
So, for example, a lovely study not so long ago, if you've got food addiction, you're nearly 7 times more likely to be type 2 diabetic. It's not that it's definitely a sort of one-to-one relationship, but it makes it more likely. Makes it more likely you're going to be obese. Makes it more likely you're going to have other health problems. So, as a society, we're all really trying to tackle all of those epidemics. And, I think for a significant proportion of people that we can't do that without acknowledging the idea that these foods are addictive. And then how do we help people? Like, there's services for people to give up smoking. There's services for people with alcohol problems.
Or gambling.
Even. Yeah. So why isn't there a service? If you've got food addiction at the moment, well, you can pay privately, but there isn't mostly if you go and see your doctor and say, I've got food addiction, they won't know where to refer you. And it's no point referring you to an eating disorder service, because they don't use that model at the moment. It's no point referring you to, a bariatric surgery necessary, because that doesn't. So bariatric surgery is impact. They kind of mask the symptoms, if you like. And as we know, a lot of people will regain the weight after surgery, or even now we're seeing patients coming through regaining the weight on Ozempic and Wegovy and so on. So it doesn't treat the addiction part, which needs proper understanding and treatment.
I'd like to say a word about fat shaming, just because so many people believe they have a weight problem because they lack strong will. And that's a terrible thing to believe about yourself.
Yep.
When actually you may well be a resourceful person, capable in other walks of life of doing all sorts of clever things.
Nearly always that's the case.
Yeah. And yet the model they have is one of shame, and their weight is a reflection of a lack of will for the world. It's set there plain for the world to see that I lack a strong will. And it's a great relief for a number of people when I explain the model of food addiction. Then they understand that this is related only to food and your addiction to some forms of food. But actually, I see you as an intelligent, resourceful human being who needs help with this specific problem. And some people cry when you tell them that. They're so relieved because nobody has ever given them this useful model, and it can be a great saver. And maybe some of the people listening now might understand that it's very specific to
It's
what
our
they...
model.
It definitely
Yes.
was our model as well. I really appreciated what you said about the 2 different types of hunger, because I think having that bit of knowledge is very actionable. It's something I can, when I'm thinking about how I'm feeling, I can try to decide, is it a hunger where I will eat a steak and egg and I'll be okay? Or is it a hunger where I need toast and jam? And healing with the diamonds, what we want is, let everyone know that this information is out there and it's something that you can do on your own. You do need to put some effort into it. And help from professionals like you is wonderful. But if they don't have that help, where can they start? And so starting with the ideas of the two types of hunger. And I know that the people I've tried to help, right, and have started low carb or trying to cut out some ultra processed foods, they get a few weeks in and then they relapse, for lack of a better word. And they tell me, oh, it just didn't work for me. I was feeling really like flu-like symptoms, right? The carb flu. And what kind of advice would you give someone just starting out to get to that point where they are feeling
They feel
better?
better. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that one really good thing that John Briffa did in the book was to give an expectation that, those symptoms will probably occur because you're swapping the fuel that you're burning. And he gave some bits of advice that we always give now about, have a bit more salt because you're losing salt. If you insulin drops, then you're going to lose salt. So, put salt on your meals, drink plenty of fluids. You probably are going to feel a bit rough, but it's a good sign because you're going to kind of come out the other side. I think the other thing that can happen is that people, even when they've come out the other side, they're all right for a little bit, and then they start thinking, right, well, I've got it now, or I can just manage a little bit, and that's really fatal for people like me that have that addiction tendency, because you can't have a little bit. It's like saying to an alcoholic, well, you could have a bit of whiskey because you've done so well. You can have a whiskey on Friday. And we trick ourselves, don't we, with that kind of thinking. Well, I can have a little bit because I've done so well. It's my birthday or whatever it is. And that's the sort of addiction part of our brain's thinking. Now, one or two people can do that and get straight back on track, but there is always a risk that you're going to crash and burn. Then I think it's reinforcing the idea that they can do it. This noticing how you feel thing is really important. Well, how did you feel when you were sticking to it? And how do you feel now that you've relapsed, and what's happening to your blood sugars and what's happening to your blood pressure and that sort of noticing. I think it's trying to get people back on track as fast as possible without a sense of blame or shame. That is what happened. People do wobble, and I always say it's a bit like learning to ride a bike. How do you learn to ride a bike? By falling off. Essentially, you fall to the left, you get back on, you wobble a bit, you fall to the right, you get back on, you wobble a bit, and over time you sort of wobble a bit less. And I think that's been our experience over the last sort of 13 years or so, that that you do still wobble, but much less. So it's not about perfection. It's about progress and learning from your mistakes and planning what to do differently next time. What were the circumstances of that? Was it a holiday? What, hungry, angry, lonely, tired? They're the classics as well, aren't they? Halt. What was actually going on that led to that kind of lapse can be a good thing to analyze, so that another time, they can take food with them, or that, sometimes people say to us things like, well, I got stuck in A&E because my daughter had broken her finger at PE and there was nothing to eat. And so, we talk about, well, what might be some strategies, keep something in the car that's non-perishable, blah, blah, blah. So you kind of problem solving the situation, really.
I've got a couple of specifics to add in. One would be magnesium supplementation. I've found clinically to be quite helpful. The other one is, we're all part of a family. Who does the cooking? Who does the shopping? And can you involve those family members in your recovery? Because if they don't understand how serious this is for you, they start thinking, go on, it's a birthday. Why don't you just? I've made this for you. And actually, I've said to many people, shall we chat to your partner about how serious this is for you. And sometimes it can really help if you actually say, I actually need your help. This is so difficult for me. I need your help. Because otherwise, surely they plan a holiday, an all-inclusive holiday or a Christmas party or something, and that can be the end of somebody's hopes for a while because they go back. So I think the only thing is sometimes family members overdo it and become a bit controlling. So that requires sensitivity, because do you think it might be helpful if your husband was on board? How might you discuss this with him? Or perhaps he could read Jen's book, Fork in the Road, to understand how serious this is for me. So
And
those are a
new
couple
edition.
yes, the new edition, only available on Amazon.
Awesome. So this is what we help individuals and families with all the time. And, we're lovely coaches, and there's so much lived experience over 25 years amongst us of all this troubleshooting and strategies. And interestingly, a couple of things that came up over and over again was wheat in the form of cake. I always remind my clients it's not just sugar. And I've never had a client yet eat plain sugar. So, what is the sugar delivery system? And dairy came up. And
Yeah.
ironically, in 2013, I started in the paleo primal movement. So the overlap there is they're both grain free.
Yeah.
Paleo includes no dairy, but going grain free is not only wheat free, but Kay Lynne and I have been grain free now for the 25 years, occasional white rice here or there. But the awesomeness of grain free is it takes so much decision fatigue away, and it helps navigate the trickiest situations, holiday parties, cruises. We are simply grain free. So when we go into that coffee shop and all of them here have the baked goods, there's no negotiation. We're simply grain free. Like, we don't negotiate robbing a banker. Oh, am I going to rob a bank or not today? And it really, Kay Lynne's an elementary school teacher, and there's always grains in the bake room. It's literally cake culture around the world. So when I have clients struggling, specifically that recommendation of, can you try grain free? It simplifies, and they're like, "You were right." And just everything clicks. Some need dairy-free or a dairy-free period, but I don't know if you've found just it simplifies, it takes away decision fatigue so
I
much. So
think it is
that
easier for people to have these, the rules basically, or bright lines. There's a bright line eating, isn't there? These sort of, yeah, it's easier for the brain to say, right, that's not my food.
Another concept I'd like to just introduce is the idea that what you are addicted to may change. And so I've got patients who do really well, and then they start being addicted to peanuts, salted peanuts, which there wasn't a problem, and then becomes
yeah.
one. And
Yeah.
then after that, it could be red wine. And so vigilance is required. If
Yeah.
those same behaviors start occurring with a different food, you probably may need to knock that on the head as well. And
Yeah.
Jen stopped drinking about 2 to 3 years ago now, because it was just necessary, because it was undermining her goals. And so do watch out for it. It can morph.
Yeah,
It can morph.
sweeteners is another problem. And dairy is such a common one there that people start
Yeah.
really overeating cheese or cream. Double cream's a really common one. We had people come on the retreats who had been low carb for a long time, but then had sort of developed, a real fixation with cream and yogurt and stuff like that. Yeah. As Ken Berry says, we're the only species that have milk as adults. Every other species,
Yeah.
it's a baby food.
Right.
And you had mentioned earlier, and I know you're involved, or were, I don't know, currently, Park Run, and how, well, a virtuous cycle can be set up, starting with the basics. We call it the big four: sugar, refined carbs, seed oils, and ultra processed foods. Focus on those. You get less hungry. And you also mentioned something, David, that's critical, and it's a big part of the fasting method, that there is actually, especially if you are on a low carb, healthy fat, adequate protein way of eating, you can actually ride the hunger wave. Your ghrelin will go up for a little bit, but instead of hunger going up, and it's such a powerful, like you feel like you're Rocky in the Rocky Balboa movement. You didn't eat at 11 a.m. and then it's 12:30 and you're not hungry at all, and it's
Yeah.
past lunch, and you can go to dinner and oh my gosh, I'm a superstar. You actually ride the hunger wave. But I started talking about park run and movement, but that virtuous cycle. People do get more energy and healthier from this way of eating. And then they can use that energy for more movement, for better sleep. And then it just sets up a whole cascade of healing.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've seen that loads of times,
Oh,
haven't we, in,
lots of
in
times.
patients? Yeah.
And that just leads also when you're preparing to change your diet, part of the preparation, if you're going to cut the grains or the big four, maybe you don't go to the gym as much for a couple of weeks, that kind of thing. Go easy. You're doing a difficult thing. Be kind
Yeah,
to
that's
yourself.
true.
You may find that you can't run as far or carry as great a weight or whatever, but that doesn't matter because later on, as I discovered, my energy levels were far greater, but I had to wait for my liver to produce those enzymes. And that, in my case, probably took about a month, something like that. So part of the planning process is it a good time to do it? Maybe it is a strenuous, a difficult time, or try and plan for success, which is, I know, something Jen believes in a lot.
Yeah,
Definitely.
becoming fat adapted. Usually what Kay Lynne was saying about that 3 weeks, such great advice. They're not yet fat adapted, and they take that first 3 weeks as a forever, and it's not.
Mm.
It's the body learning to run on ketones and free fatty acids. And yes, we've had so much success telling that to people and saying that it typically, at minimum, takes 3 weeks, can take 6 or 9 weeks to become fully fat
Yeah.
adapted. And, don't give up. And they're typically feeling better, but then we let them know you're going to continue to feel even better.
Yeah. I think another thing is don't often the people I see, because they've had a lifetime of restriction, and middle-aged women are often thinking about trying to lose weight. So, but in the early days, it's important not to see it as a diet in the sense of sort of trying to lose weight, but just to get in a regular. You've got to eat enough protein, you've got to eat enough fat, you've got to be fueling the body right, because you don't want to be literally hungry on top of that adaptation, really. So that will make it worse for you. Eat enough initially, and then the body will do its own adjustments in terms of your hunger and so on.
In general, so I find hunger when people say, I'm struggling because I'm so hungry. That's I'm fascinated when people say that. And nearly always, when you drill down into it, they're not having enough protein. And these are the people that say, well, I'm having an egg every morning. And I'm saying, well, you could have 3 easily. And so
I've actually gone from 2 to 5 eggs with a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And the weight starts coming up like
Yes,
gangbusters.
because if they're struggling with hunger, that worries me, because is that going to be successful? I'm not sure if you feel constantly hungry. The minute you are stressed, then that will fall down. And so dealing with hunger by trying more protein is often helps.
Some people confuse, like you say, well, probably you should be having 90 grams of protein. They think that's 90 grams of meat.
Right.
But of course
right.
It's not 90 grams of meat, because there's lots of other things in meat, but it's whatever. If you're going to have a 30 grams at each meal, it's 5 eggs, or it's, a nice big steak, or, piece or two of chicken. And people do think that's way too much, but actually that's That's what they need.
I think one of the big overarching ideas here is that knowledge is power, right? And the more knowledge that you have on this subject, the better you can do. And so we know how we offer our knowledge here as coaches. But if anyone wants more information about what you guys are doing, how can they find out more?
So, so we've already mentioned Fork in the Road. So that's the little book. If you just look that up on Amazon and Jen Unwin, you'll find that. Also, I'm highly involved with Heidi's charity, which is the collaborative health community, and our project is called Food Addiction Solutions. So obviously, I'll give you guys the links for that. And then on X, I'm at Dr. Jen Unwin.
Right.
And I'm Low Carb GP on X. I always ask people, how do they like to learn? Because people learn in different ways. How would you like the information? Do you want a book, which Jen's written one? Or for some people, they want to know specific recipes, in which case I'd advise, we've helped write, I think it's 8 recipe books now. The main author is Kate Caldesi, and her husband is an Italian chef. And Jen and I, in each of those books, have written something on physiology and psychology to guide you. So the Caldesi recipe books for some people. And then I like the Freshwell app. So this is a free app. You don't have to pay for it. Downloadable, I believe, in North America. The Freshwell app, where they took the work that Jen and I did and turned it into an app with recipes. And I think it's damn good. Anything else?
THC for the sugar influence.
Yeah, yes. And of course, there are my sugar infographics, which is helping people understand the effect that different foods have on their blood sugar. So these infographics have been downloaded literally millions of times, and they're now translated into 35 languages. So if you want to help people in Spanish or Portuguese or Russian or Chinese or whatever, there are 35 languages, and they're available on Jen and I were founder members of another UK charity, the Public Health Collaboration. That
Yeah,
you
we
guys
had Sam on several
Yeah.
podcasts.
Thank you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of resources available for free from the Public Health Collaboration website.
And I'm really happy you brought in recipes, and we met that great cook at Real Food Rocks
Yeah.
because our central pillar is called food freedom, and it's a way of eating we love that loves us back. And the power of psychology and self-talk, believing is seeing. I always advise my clients, because I learned this, that instead of saying I can't have something, that I'm choosing not to have that. And I am choosing to have my food. And honestly, low carb, healthy fat food tasting so delicious and being so satiating, that was 98% of me losing 120 pounds, was just switching to that food and then embracing being a home cook and having fun with it. So, and we were just talking before we started, and we've had this at so many family holidays. Kay Lynne is the main cook, that we're cooking grain free, and we're, doing maybe a gravy, which we love, that is both grain free and dairy free. And people are like, this is the best gravy I ever had. Oh, it's grain free. Or these are the best mashed potatoes I ever had. Well, they were actually mashed cauliflower, but
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
people, when you're not denying yourself anything, you're kind of letting life in. So
Yeah.
that mindset is just so important.
Yeah.
It isn't about suffering. This isn't about us all suffering and abstaining, and it's about
Absolutely.
celebrating food and life. And I always, when people tell me they're a foodie, I'm always pleased, because they're creative.
They know how to cook.
And they'll work with me to produce food that they love, and then they're safe. Once they don't, they're not grieving all of the things they can't eat. They're full of, I'd quite like to try that, and I'm going to make that, and I'll do some bone broth. Yeah. And so I so agree with you.
My granddaughter, the one who's just nearly 14, sent me a WhatsApp message 2 days ago, and she was at some other person's house, and she just said, I'm just messaging to say I never realized how amazing your cheese sauce was, because I've just had somebody else's cheese sauce. It was very disappointing. And again, it's grain free. We just make it basically it's not dairy free. It's double cream with grated cheese and a bit of mustard. That's how I make it. It's very, very simple, sort of three ingredients. And she was just messaging to say that she hadn't realized how good that was. That was nice.
That feels so good, especially coming from a teenager who, typically, our teen is going through you guys don't know anything. I'm going to try other stuff. And, she's suffering in her own way right now, skin issues and everything. And, she's on her journey, and all we can do is present the information and have real food here in the house for when she is here. And then, and hopefully she'll, eventually come around to that as well.
Well, this same granddaughter has terrible trouble with her skin if she eats
grains,
any processed foods, grains particularly, but also sugars. So she still does that occasionally, but she's learned that if she wants her skin to look beautiful, she just eats real food.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. We appreciate the work that you have done and all the information that people can get from you. And as always, if you're listening and you want somebody who's gone through it and lived through it, we are available for coaching. The Unwins are available for a wealth of information. So please check them out.
And Happy New Year, guys.
And Happy New Year to you both. And to Piper.
Thank you. I will let her know. Thanks.